So today I want to continue on with the Dirty Little Secrets series. Yeah, it's been a minute since I've been here. I had a son who went to college. I had a daughter who started high school. We had clients that dropped us, and AI hit the scene like a freight train. Plus, I'll be honest, I got a motorcycle. So, if I'm honest, I've been riding. Anyway, all right, but I wanted to continue on with the next round of the series. And that is, you're fired as a designer, the uncomfortable truth. And this is hopefully a survival guide, things that I have learned over the years that have helped me get through it. You know, we don't want to admit it, but this happens all the time. It has happened so many times. It just happened to myself not too long ago. It's just the way it is, especially if you're a freelancer. As a freelancer, they're going to always bring it in-house at some point. That's typically the cycle. You get the gig as a freelancer, you build up the business to the point where they can afford someone in-house, and they bring it in-house. And they may offer you the gig. That is a hiring funnel. But sometimes they won't. And sometimes you won't want to. You want to stay a freelancer. But that is the cycle. So what do you do when you're ghosted from a business or a client after you present your work? You know, I got to tell you, the way you respond really does make a difference in both protecting your reputation as a designer and also your rights, what you can and cannot do, and that I have learned over the years. So the first thing that I would say is, it's go time. Getting fired cuts. It cuts hard. And rejection stings more than you expect. At least for me, it hurts every time. And it doesn't matter the relationship. Professional, with my kids, with my wife, with my parents, whoever, my coworkers, whatever the case may be. But when it's a client, it cuts. So I would recommend that you understand that. And you're not alone. It's happened to most freelancers. You have been fired. They ghost you. They don't talk to you. They stop answering emails, whatever. So when that happens, your first instinct is to what? I get frustrated, mostly at the lack of communication. And sometimes I even get angry. And then I'll start trying to figure out what went wrong. And then if I start doing that, that just kicks off a vicious cycle. Then I want to be reactionary. I want to fix it. What can I do? Should I have done this in the design? Should I have done that? Should I have added this? Is it too weak? Maybe if I sent another thing. It's really, really a tough situation to be in as a designer. And when that self-doubt hits, my best advice to you after 30 years in this business is stop. Stop self-doubting, okay? It is what it is, as my dad used to say. Being sensitive and having an eye for detail, that's your strength as a designer. It's not a weakness. So don't doubt yourself. You may be responding because you are a sensitive individual that is part of your craft. So what I recommend instead is stay professional. It's hard, but do your best. Even when you're frustrated, do not burn bridges. I have burnt so many bridges as my wife. But I have learned that the design world is smaller than you think. And I've learned from my wife, be gracious. Say thank you. It goes a long way. And my wife is so gracious. Even when she's getting pounded into the dirt, that woman keeps a smile on her face. I don't know how she does it. I'm over here losing it. But what I have learned is that watching her and her composure is professionalism. And it has made me stronger, not weaker. And that took a while for me to learn. Now, what my wife doesn't necessarily do, she's keeping composure on the outside, but on the inside, she forgets to ask certain questions. Like, you need to clarify the situation. Are we actually fired, or is the project on hold, or is it pivoting, or what's the deal? And I will ask those questions. Don't stew in the unknown. Politely, that's where I mess up, is politely find out why the contract ended. Sometimes it's just style, or it's the scope, or an internal reshuffling. Oftentimes, it really is. You may get caught in a political battle. That happens to the best of us more times than we care to count. One faction in a group wants one thing, and another faction in a company wants the other, and you're in the middle. And you have to please both sides because you're a freelancer. Get the facts. Are you actually fired, or is the project paused, or is it pivoting? What's the deal? After you get clarification, maybe you have to address your payment situation. But if you're still hurt, angry, or uncomfortable, I would wait. I would wait to discuss your payment. In the meantime, go back and go through all of your emails, your contract, see if the milestones have been met, any cancellation fees, and if you don't have cancellation fees in your contract or your email agreement, maybe you should consider adding cancellation fees. And then payment upon the final presentation of your work. If you don't have a contract, that's okay too, because some people don't like contracts. They won't do business with you if they think they need to sign a contract. In my early days, I used to think that I had to have a written contract, and I went round and round with a lawyer on a project. She was branching away from her law gig to start her own law firm, and she just ground me into a dust in contracts. She put such a bad taste in my mouth that I said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to necessarily write contracts like I used to. That was a real difficult project. So I started doing email proposals, and I started doing email agreements. I kept them brief. I kept them to the point. Oftentimes I'd have a phone call. We would discuss it. And so the email would just be a recap of what we discussed. It just seemed a lot smoother than having a contract. I have rarely had a client fill out a branding statement, a project questionnaire of who's your target audience. I have had much more success doing it on the phone, walking them through the process where I have the document open and I would just ask them questions about, so who are you trying to reach? Can you help me understand what you're trying to say? I mean, is this a brochure, or did you want people to be able to buy? Are we creating a full concept of your business, or a brand, if you will? Or do you just need a logo? Do you just need an icon? Help me understand what it is that you're thinking. I've had much more success than hitting somebody with a document that says, here, just answer this questionnaire. You will have to hold the customer's hand. But all that, don't be afraid to invoice for any completed work. You're entitled to payment. So this is part of addressing the payment. Anything that you've delivered, don't be afraid to invoice. And my wife, that's where my wife backs off. She lets me handle asking the uncomfortable questions about money. And I don't care. You owe me. So sometimes it's a strength. And that leads me to protect your work. One thing that I did write in all of my invoices down at the bottom, that our company reserves the right to maintain all works until all fees have been settled. That's pretty much my language, and it's on the bottom of all of my invoices, because that's a receipt. So they pay, and that's a receipt. And I recommend you retain ownership until payment is received. I certainly try to. It doesn't always work out, and I'll get to that, but I certainly try to. Especially if your contract says otherwise, the company may write something in there that says, hey, from the very jump, everything you produce is ours. I've worked for colleges where that's the case. Everything I produced was their work, and I agreed to that. Because the copyright can remain with you until the client pays. It just depends on how you've structured your agreement. You can also state your usage rights in your emails. It doesn't have to be this full-blown, I own all the rights. It could just be say, well, I'm just going to hang on to these files until you're all set up over there. If you need to watermark or restrict use, that's a way of protecting your work. I've never had to do that. I know that websites do that, especially a lot of the AI sites are doing that. But as you go through these things, What do you take forward? And how do you learn from the experience? Everybody talks about learn from the experience, but that's oftentimes not necessarily action items. What I have to do is I will typically run the situation through my head over and over and over again. And I'll ask some basic questions of myself. And I have to get brutally honest with myself. Was your agreement solid and clear? I have learned that raising children, you have to be clear, which has also helped me in my business. You have to be clear with customers. You have to be clear, and you have to be unafraid and upfront. You may lose the business if you're too aggressive. Maybe it was never your business and it would have been a stink show if you went through with it anyway. Because every time I have chased the dollar instead of being true to how I want to work, it has rarely worked out when money was the only motivation. To that point, if your agreement was solid and clear, were your milestones met? Did you actually hit your deadlines? And were the checkpoints or the milestones clearly defined? Because that's up to you. You got to tell the customer what you're going to deliver, when you're going to deliver, and how much it's going to cost. For example, we used to do handshake pricing. So I would give this guy, let's just say a logo, for example. So for this person that was taking my class, I'd give them a $250 logo. But over here, a client that reached out on the web, I would charge them $500. Well, people talk. People will call your references. And I got busted and I got called out early on in my career about pricing. And that taught me to tighten up my pricing. I have a price list of what I'm willing to charge. Now, there is some flexibility in there. And I have different tiers of how much work and how much time. So if they want a logo that is trademarked, of course that's going to cost a lot more than if they just want a quickie, throw it on a website to get it up and going. Completely different cost. And I had to break all of that out. I had to tighten that up. And you may need to do the same thing. Learn from that. Strengthen your process. Another thing is, how do you collect the money? So here's how I do my pricing. So let's say the project is going to be $1,000. What I will do is I'll take that $1,000 and I'll cut it in half. So that's $500. That's what I get as a deposit. But then I take that other back half, the other $500, and I cut that in half and I break it into 3 payments. So that's $250. And I word this in my agreement emails that says $500 deposit gets you design consultation and any quick draft ideas. And then when we tighten up those quick drafts, any wireframes, any content outlines, that's what the 50% deposit gets. And then after that's tightened up and I deliver a Photoshop or I code something up or a vector art of what we've discussed, then I get the other $250. Because typically, and this is mostly for web stuff, when I'm doing a website, a lot of times you'll be waiting for the customer. You'll be waiting for photos. You'll be waiting for content mostly. What do you want to say on the About page? Now, AI has made that a lot easier, and it makes something that you can charge for and add it to your invoice, that you can actually write the content with very little knowledge of the company, and you can go off and write content, and now they're editing it. But typically you're waiting for the client to provide you something, whether it be photos, line art, a chart, content, whatever the case. But in my third, you're sitting on $750. You only have $250 that they owe you, and you're waiting for them. So that allows you to move on. You've gotten 2/3 of the money. And I had to learn that. I used to get 50% up front, and the project would hit a wall and just stop. And you don't always know whether or not you should bug them. And that should be in your agreement. What happens if the project stalls? I have addressed that as years have gone on. And I'll say things jokingly like, well, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to bug you. And some people accept that, and some people are like, no, you aren't. So, grain of salt. You got to take it with a grain of salt. So what happens if payment becomes a question? Let's say they don't want to pay you the final payment. That's happened more than once to us. Let's go back to the earlier points. Be professional. Always. Please and thank you goes a long way. Keep your cool. Yes, I get it. Those such and such owe you money. I get it. And if you need to document the issue in writing, then do so. Typically, you don't have to. I have found that typically most people will work with you if you stay chill. But if you need to take action, you can go to small claims. I've been to small claims. I was very fiery in my early years, and I wanted every cent because the contract said so. And yes, that works out. But what they don't tell you about, I have won small claim suits where the client owed me money. But guess what? It's up to you to collect it. You got to get it from them. Still, yes, you have a judgment that says, yes, they owe you the money. But you got to get it. The courts aren't going to collect it from them. At least not when I was going to small claims. I don't know. Maybe it's changed. With social media, complaining on social media about them, that has worked in the past. I have left comments on company websites. Be careful if you do work with this company, get your money up front. I have left those kinds of comments out of complete frustration. I wouldn't recommend it, but I have done it. And if you feel you need to, party on. Because I have gotten phone calls from higher ups. If I was dealing with a director or a manager, I'd get a call from a vice president. That happened to me with an internet company. I was dealing with a manager and I left a note that says, hey, great group of folks, but get your money. And I've gotten a call. I've gotten a call that says, hey, what's the problem? Can we not fix this? Because they don't want their social media to tarnish. So social media can help. But use it sparingly, because if you're out there complaining all the time, then you look like the problem. Or if payment becomes a question, let it go. I have eaten thousands of dollars of work that I gave away. I just dropped it because it wasn't worth the fight. It wasn't worth my mental energy. I didn't want to get my focus derailed over nonsense. I just gave them the artwork, or I gave them the site. And I just, whatever, it is what it is. I was still running it. How can I avoid that? It would go back to tightening up my agreements, being clear with my milestones, being upfront about payments. But letting go, the sting is real, but the choice to learn from it is completely yours. So again, use it sparingly. Sometimes you need to stand your ground. Sometimes you need to let it go. Anyway, that's all I got for today. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoy these videos because I certainly enjoy making them. Thanks for stopping by, and you have a great day. All right, take care. Bye-bye.